Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. We've got a cold day in the garage, but a lot of repairs to do on the truck. Between a coolant leak and a check engine light, it's finally come to the point where I need to replace the water pump. At that point, I'm going to do a couple other things while I'm there. I should have done this repair a few months ago when I was doing the serpentine belt, as you need to take the serpentine belt off to get to the water pump. So here I am having to do this repair now. I'll go through all of the parts that I picked up for this, and then a few kind of optional extra parts that just kind of go associated with the check engine light that I had. So I picked up the water pump. It's actually a larger unit than I expected with a few more pieces on it. But to go along with that, I picked up a new thermostat and thermostat housing. And along with that, I have the coolant temp sensor and the air idle temperature sensor. Just two more things that can be associated with my check engine light, and they were only a couple dollars each. So I figured while I'm kind of taking care of everything in this area, I'll go ahead and put some new sensors in. My water pump did come with a new gasket. I wasn't sure if it did or not, so I did pick up a spare gasket. So I'll just kind of put that on the shelf for now and use the one that came with the water pump kit. So yeah, with that, I guess it's time to start digging into the truck. From a dealership, I think this would be about an $800 job. So with the parts I purchased, it was about $100. So it's not a very expensive job, but I guess there is some labor involved. Nothing should be too difficult. It's just a little time consuming, as you do have to take off a lot of the things on the front of the engine. So we'll dig into this and save ourselves a couple $100 doing it in the garage. So as my coolant drains out, there's a few things I'll have to remove on the top of the engine. Obviously my overflow reservoir bottle for the coolant and my windshield washer fluid needs to come out of the way, along with the fan shroud. But before I get the fan shroud off, I'll have to go in and get the actual fan off the engine. When I drain out my coolant, I always go to this lower radiator hose that attaches to the water pump. It's easiest for me to get off my drain plug on the radiator. Doesn't always work that well. And right above it are the two heater hoses that go into the water pump. We'll also have to take those off eventually, but we'll just let this last little bit of coolant drip out of the plug. I've been leaving a mess on the floor anyway, so I don't mind the bit of splash that comes from removing and draining the coolant from this hose. Just to help out with some of my spacing, I took my K&N air filter and air filter box out of the way. With a stock setup, you might not need to, but getting that out of the way allows me an easier chance to remove my reservoir bottles. So now before I get the shroud out of the way, like I said, I'll go in and get the fan unhooked. Then the shroud should only have kind of two bolts. You can see we have one on this side, and I think there should just be one on the far side, and then that shroud should just slide up out of place. One of the more difficult spots of getting the fan off is working the fan clutch pulley. It will spin if your bolt is kind of rusted on there like mine is. So I went ahead and picked up the correct tool for this. I'll link one in the description below. But you can see it has these knobs that will lock into the pulley that will then allow me to either use this wrench or the pipe wrench if I need it to knock the bolt loose. So using my new one as an example, you can see I have these holes in the pulley, and the tool will just clip right in and lock it in place as we knock the bolt loose. So I just have my long breaker bar resting against the truck just to hold that a little bit more steady. Then I should be able to come in here. Looks like I got it. A couple taps on that. Looks like it's spinning. And it definitely is. So there's another win for having the right tool for the job. The fan is a normal thread, so lefty loosey, righty tighty. Really think this is the hardest part of the job. Everything else, there's a lot of bolts on the water pump, but once you get them going, they should come out. Just set that fan down and then go ahead, get the shroud off, and then the fan might clear out one way, but instead of trying to wiggle it out, get the shroud off, make a lot of room, then take the fan out. One other thing to take off before the shroud comes off is this upper radiator hose. You can see it right here, the rusty clamp. If we follow it through, kind of gets a little dark in there, but it attaches to the thermostat housing. With the shroud out of the way, you can see we have a lot more room in here to work with. I have to take the belt off next. Here's the new tensioner that we've recently put on. So I'll just relieve the tension on that. Pull the belt off. I think I will have to take off the upper pulley, tensioner pulley, and the lower one, just to get access to the bolts on the water pump. You can see the pulley for the water pump right in the center here. And then the host of bolts that kind of go around all the different places. You can see here we have the upper radiator hose that goes into the thermostat, and it looks pretty junked up there, and then below it is quite shiny, and that's part of where my leak is. You can definitely see where there's moisture below that thermostat housing and on the water pump, indicating we have a bad part in there right now. So now it's just remove bolts until the thing comes out. And we have our new water pump sitting on the table. I'll use this as like a bolts part diagram, and as I take off a bolt, I'll put it in the corresponding hole where it belongs. Nothing crazy here. I just got a 3/8 drive ratchet into the tensioner. Gonna flip it, pull up on it. I'll get that belt off. Relieve the tension, and then we'll just snake the belt out. I took a photo, so I'll have a diagram of how the belt goes back on. Luckily, once you get these bolts cracked loose, they come out nice and easy. They don't have a lot of, they shouldn't have been torqued pretty high. I think it's like 18 foot-pounds. Hardest bolt for me was this one just below the AC condenser. I couldn't really get my socket on it, so I had to break it loose with a wrench. Now I'm just getting like 1/8 of a turn at a time, but it is coming loose, and that should be the last bolt. I pulled out these two for the AC condenser bracket, thinking that if I took those out I could wiggle it up a little bit to get a socket on it, but no luck there, so a wrench it was. Wish I could reenact this for you, but as I got that last bolt out, I just gave it a nice little tug, and you can see it did release, and it pulled off nicely from the front of the engine. But as one should expect, there was a little bit of coolant, so we add it to the spill below. We'll clean it up once we're all done, but it's free. I still have 2 hoses attached, this upper radiator hose and one of the heater hoses, so I have to dig in, get those off, and then go ahead and start putting my thermostat and my thermostat housing on my new unit, get the hoses reattached, and start putting the bolts back together. Now with everything removed off the front of the engine, you can see where I have my light. I got to go through and scrape it off some of the gunk that is going to be where the gasket seals to. So I'll just go through with a gasket scraper or a razor blade and get rid of the leftover residue there, and then we'll be almost ready to put the new water pump on. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and move all of the bolts that I have kind of in their placeholders on the new unit. Put them in the old unit just so I can keep track of where everything is. And then with the new unit kind of no longer being a placeholder, I'm going to go ahead, get the thermostat in its spot, get the housing over top of it, and then start to put this unit into the truck. You can see here I have the new intake air temperature sensor. It's just obviously in that hole right behind it on the intake, and it just snaps into place. So I got the old coolant temperature sensor out, and you can see the new one here on the left. If anybody's ever wondering where that coolant temperature sensor is, it sits behind the AC condenser and goes in that hole right in the middle. To get the AC condenser out, there was the two long bolts that I had already previously removed, and then this final bolt that sits in the back, pried it out of the way. Everything else is still attached, so it's still sitting there, and then the sensor goes in the hole, and there's a wire with like a safety clip plugged into it. Well, I have my thermostat in. You can see it here. I have the gasket and the housing on, and then I put in the rubber gasket that fills in the groove on the back side of the water pump. And I think now it's ready to go back into the truck. Bit of a progress report here. You can see I have the new assembly on and torqued down. It's torquing everything to 18 foot-pounds, and as I torque something, I came over here and just made a little mark with a Sharpie to make sure I was grabbing everything and not missing the bolts on the underside that I couldn't see. Started to get the hoses attached on the passenger side. Still have to go back and get the driver's side hose attached. I did buy this new. So I have the new one here ready to go on. Just have to put the clamps on it. The only reason I bought a new one is the old one looked pretty beat up when I took it off the truck. So for a little insurance for 20 bucks, bought a new hose. And just like that, we have the truck all back together. Only thing left to do now is to add the coolant and bleed the system and double check for any leaks, but hopefully we don't have any. Well, there you go, guys. Another job well done. Took me about 7 hours to do, which admittedly is pretty slow. I was fumbling around a little bit first time doing the job. I didn't have the right tools to begin with, but once I got the right tools, everything went a lot smoother. So if I were to do this again with all the right tools from the beginning and some prior knowledge on how to do it, I think I could get it down to about 4 hours to do the job. So altogether, I was able to save a good deal of money from doing it myself as opposed to taking it somewhere. And I got a couple tools out of it, which is always a bonus. And with that, thanks for watching.